I'm going to call the May 15th. Are you set? I'm going to call the May 15th DRB meeting to order. First is agenda changes.
I just want to mention one thing. Today is Dawn's last day with us as minute taker, I should say. And her business has been very successful, and she's been great to work with, and just wanted to thank her for the work that she does.
Thank you. You did an awesome job. All right, if everybody can review the minutes of May 1st.
So I have a comment on the sidewalk buffer stream where it says Alex confirmed that that portion of the sidewalk would need to be redesigned, and I would like to add as part of an alternative intersection if that comes to pass, because it doesn't need to be redesigned now. That's it. I'll move to approve as amended.
I will second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, next is Martin Foods of South Burlington.
And I'd like to make a public
yeah, sorry.
comment. But I would like to, for purposes of public record, say that I am going to address my decision to sit on the Hannaford decision. And I realize that I previously recused myself on a previous application, but I was really new to the board and I didn't understand the rules of conflict of interest. And I feel that I can currently make an impartial decision on the Hannaford application using the appropriate, what we rule to be the appropriate current zoning regulations.
And to follow that up, this is Jonathan. I would say that I worked, and I'm currently employed by RSG, which is a firm that was retained by the town in 2015 to do a peer review of the applicant's traffic study. At that point, I was not employed by RSG, and so that I don't believe that I have any conflict of interest in terms of representing that previous work, and I have no, I'm able to impartially carry out the rules of this board.
So, Mr. Chairman, just for clarity of record, under our rules, the applicant, the board members can participate unless the board, by a majority vote, determines they should not. Is there any request from the applicant or anyone else that the board members in question not participate in these proceedings?
None on our part, no.
Okay.
All right. So next is Martin Foods of South Burlington. We continued it from 4/17. And first, I want to go over the procedural guidance by the DRB. On May 1st, DRB held a closed deliberative session with the town's legal counsel and staff to discuss procedural issues regarding the review. No formal actions were taken and no motions passed. However, the board did instruct staff to communicate that it's planning to follow the procedural recommendations as generally outlined in the April 10th, 2018 updated opinion from the town legal counsel. Both applications will be reviewed using the current land use regulations, subdivision regulations effective July 28, 2015. Zoning regulations effective October 3rd, 2016. Official map effective May 25th, 2009. All of the applicable review standards will be used for the site plan review, i.e. not limited to just stormwater and traffic. Both applications will be reviewed concurrently. The subdivision revision application will be reviewed via one hearing conducted over multiple meetings, consistent with section 7.7.1 of the subdivision regulations. The subdivision application will not go through a sketch plan. review or preliminary plat review, i.e. a final decision on the subdivision revision will be issued after the conclusion of this hearing. All right, so first, we're going to start with the general site plan review on traffic. So if the applicant would like to come up. And I would just, one other note, the meeting, we decided the meeting will be done at 9:15. We have a lot of written testimony from the experts, so we'd like to be held at 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, just a quick overview of what you submitted.
So if I may, just for the record, my name is David White here representing the applicant, Hannaford. With me, Roger Dickinson, our traffic engineer with Lamoureux and Dickinson. I think I'll turn it over to Roger for the principal presentation on traffic. To the extent there are other things, I will take the lead on those. So, Roger.
Okay, thank you. So throughout this process, our traffic impact studies have utilized conservative projections on a number of items. Background traffic volumes, even though traffic volumes declined from 2008 to 2012, we continued to use the higher traffic volume and have carried that through our analyses. Growth rates dropped to 0 from 2010 to 2019. We continued to use a 3% growth rate for that 9-year period. Lampman's trip generation, we've always have included their present level of trip generation in the analyses, although their land use is likely to change. The Hannaford's trip generation, we continue to use 386 trip ends, which was calculated from the 8th edition of the trip generation manual. Even though we now have 9th and 10th editions that have since been published, which would give us lower trip generation rates, we've continued to use that higher number. Hannaford continues to propose the following traffic improvements as part of this new application. Modify the traffic signal at Charlotte Road to provide concurrent side street phasing instead of the present split phasing. Increase the storage length on Commerce Street to provide additional storage. Increasing the storage length of the southbound left turn lane on 116 approaching Commerce Street. Relocating Aubuchon's Plaza's curb cut to be further from Route 116. Marking the Jolly Mobile's curb cuts on Commerce Street with do not block signs and pavement markings. Installing new sidewalk connections on Commerce Street Extension, and Mechanicsville Road. And they have offered to contribute $25,000 as an impact fee towards the installation of a future traffic signal at Mechanicsville Road. Next, I'd like to turn to the technical memorandum that we submitted as part of this new application dated May 8th. And the tables on the screen, actually, if you go back to that, I was just... the table on the screen is from that memorandum. And the 2019 bill DHV and the 2019 bill DHV with diverted Mechanicsville left turns are shown in these columns in the lower table on the right. We have since, at the request of the town staff, have added this no-build analysis to provide a comparison of what the conditions are or would be without Hannaford's to what they will be with Hannaford. The upper table is from the earlier 2013 traffic impact assessment. And these analyses are directly comparable 2019, no build and the 2019 build. And you'll see that the levels of service are pretty much the same, using the newer, more recent traffic counts that were used in these analyses versus the older traffic counts that were used in the 2013 analyses. One major difference is that on the Route 116 southbound left turn lane, back in 2013, that was what we called a protected left turn phasing, meaning you could only turn left in the southbound direction when you had that green arrow, and all traffic that was coming at you was stopped northbound. That's called exclusive protected left turn phasing. Now, since the repaving project, VTrans modified that signal with what's called the flashing yellow arrow. And the flashing yellow arrow provides what is known as protected plus permitted. You have a protected interval where you still have a solid green arrow, but then you have the flashing yellow arrow when you can turn left when there's a gap in oncoming traffic, northbound traffic. And that improves the level of service for that left turn movement considerably, and also reduces the queue length. Because during the PM peak hour, obviously the majority of traffic is traveling southbound, and so the signal is timed for that. So you have an excess of green time in the northbound direction that people can use to make that left turn. So the left turn, if we look at the 2019 build analyses, the left turn queue length, the maximum queue length of 200 feet here in the former analyses is reduced to 150 feet in the newer analyses, a 50-foot reduction. The technical memorandum, as I indicated, was based on newer traffic data. It also uses a newer version of the Synchro SimTraffic software that is the generally accepted software for this type of analysis. And the memorandum also addresses the different options that were developed by VTrans for Mechanicsville, for dealing with Mechanicsville Road and the levels of service that occur there during peak periods. I'm not going to spend a lot of time getting into that. That I'm sure you folks will, though. Lastly, I want to just respond to the two items in the staff report that the staff requested further information on. The first one was the effect of the improvements at the Shelburne Falls Road, CVU Road intersection on southbound traffic arriving at the Commerce Street intersection during the afternoon peak hour. The analyses that we perform use 60-minute, they're for a full hour, a 60-minute time period. And as such, the analyses, there are shorter peaks that occur within that 1 hour period where traffic may be delayed at CVU Road, Shelburne Falls Road, in proceeding southbound towards Commerce Street. But over the course of that 1 hour period, we would expect reasonably that the queues at the beginning of that hour at CVU Road, Shelburne Falls Road, are pretty much the same as at the end of that hour. And so that all the traffic that arrives and departs at CVU Road, Shelburne Falls Road, does indeed make it to the Commerce Street intersection. So thus, these analyses really are reflective of the fact that we're not assuming any delay or in traffic going through the CVU Road, Shelburne Falls Road intersection. And that the improvements there, while they will improve traffic flow certainly, will not materially change the results that we've provided in these analyses. The second item that the staff requested clarification of was with regards to the the claim of an error in the calculation of the vehicle storage capacity in Attorney Dumont's April 18th letter. We have thoroughly examined the taper lengths that were designed for that left turn lane. We've confirmed that they meet the required standards. They were reviewed and accepted by VTrans. We did note, however, that because the lane is off-center, actually some of those taper lengths could be shorter than what they were designed to be. So if there was an error made, it was made, the end result was that the lane is longer than it needs to be. With regards to storage lengths, again, as I discussed earlier, the storage lengths actually have been reduced by the change in the signal phasing. Again, if anything, our analyses are conservative. There is the opportunity, indeed, to shorten that left turn lane, but instead, we'll keep it. It will remain the same at 185 feet long, which was what the town requested as the result of RSG's peer review. So there is no error in the sense that the lane needs to be longer than what it has been designed to be. In fact, the opposite is the case. So that pretty much sums up what I wanted to say.
All right, thank you. Board members have any questions?
I do. This table here, is this new, Mitch? Is this table new? I didn't recall seeing this table.
Yeah,
Okay.
this was just a recent,
So we had recommended to the applicant that they add the first column at the bottom. What you received in your packet had the second two columns, and we said, boy, it'd be nice to see the no build right next to the build and the diverted mechanics fill. So this is not in your packet, this is new tonight, so that you can better compare how these intersections are functioning in 2019 without a Hannaford, with a Hannaford, and with diverted traffic onto Mechanicsville from Commerce, or onto Commerce from Mechanicsville.
Okay. There was a note in the memo that the cycle length changed. And
With the diverted Mechanicsville Road traffic, if that does come to pass, we would recommend that the cycle length be increased to better accommodate the increased traffic flow that would result from that.
Okay. Seeing that it's a VTrans signal, I guess, and we're looking at the southbound left queuing space as being one of the more critical elements out of this, I would like to see it with the existing signal phasing, and then we have a discussion with VTrans to put forward a discussion to say, would they be willing to increase the cycle length? And as I'm aware, it's also coordinated, albeit maybe not very effectively, with the Charlotte Road intersection. So that needs to be acknowledged. A couple, I wanted your thoughts, Roger, about there's going to be other statements being made about lack of compliance with VTrans level of service policy. And I don't want to speak for the town, but I think it's quite evident from the previous work that has been completed, namely the corridor study that was completed in 2014, there is not a public desire to make 116 a 4-lane arterial through downtown. There's an emphasis in trying to maintain this as a two-lane cross-section. And therefore, I believe from reading the level service policy that Hinesburg falls into the position of having extreme circumstances where existing levels of service is less than desired, and that necessary geometric improvements may not be feasible, and lower level service may be acceptable. I'm quoting here. And a lower level service may be acceptable as long as safety and mobility for the traveling public is improved. Strategies should include traditional traffic engineering. However, and now I'm paraphrasing and I'm jumping down, is that other measures should be considered, such as travel demand management, and then I'm paraphrasing and adding my own suggestion that there might be other ways to improve safety for the traveling public, namely cyclists, pedestrians, within the project area. Has the project, as I understand, you've decided that Charlotte Road improvements is part of the mitigation. We can discuss the Commerce Street improvements. The southbound left at Commerce on 116 is the critical improvement. There's the offer of the $25,000 contribution toward whatever happens at Mechanicsville. I would like to see, and I think it would be wise of the applicant to then demonstrate compliance with the level of service policy by saying we can tolerate lowers this level of service as long as you're recommending other improvements for improving mobility and safety within the town of Hinesburg. Do you have any thoughts, and has that been a consideration to date?
Not right at the moment. I think that we'd have to give that some thought.
That's fair.
Certainly, Hannaford is supportive through their application of other modes of travel, the sidewalks and, improvements, to facilitate safe travel to and from the new supermarket. I echo your thoughts about not having a 4-lane highway through Hinesburg. I certainly agree with that, and I would concur that there are extreme circumstances in Hinesburg's case that could justify a lower level of service, and I believe we can do that in a safe manner and provide improved safety for all the users of the highways.
And I guess I would offer up that it's my professional opinion that we've had reflections and there's been testimony presented about the needs for a new TIA or a new traffic impact study. And I'm of the opinion, and I'm notifying the rest of my colleagues on the board, is that a new TIA, in my opinion, is not required. Is that the underlying standards or the regulations that a TIA needs to comply with have not changed since the original submission. The level service policy remains the same, and Hinesburg, as a town that operates on a state highway, we rely on that level service policy. So I think there are other amendments and improvements that could be communicated. Rather, in addition to just what was here, there is the statement that the Commerce Street intersection is within a high crash location, some acknowledgement of that, and then frankly, it's then the last thing that I'll leave you with is that the left-hand turn, the southbound left-hand turn lane into Commerce. For one, I'm a little bit curious that the 150 for the sim traffic is the same on all three scenarios.
I know, I saw that too.
All right. The other piece of it is that while the magnitude of volumes, any engineer and the other opponents that we'll hear from, the magnitude of volume and the actual distance there, we're not going to determine tonight. It appears that Hannaford's has signed up to acknowledge that the southbound left-hand turn lane is critical, and I will support from the board, from my opinion, is that is the critical movement, is that if that southbound turn begins to exceed its storage pocket and impede southbound flow, that's where we're going to have safety and mobility problems caused by this project. So I would recommend that, can we put into the local permitting process that a monitoring study would be performed post 1 year, and that we can determine that the southbound left design is designed as appropriately to maintain safe and efficient travel through the town.
Go ahead, sure.
We are fine with a post-construction monitoring. I think the critical element for us is that any such monitoring take a look at what portion of any issue that may be determined or discovered as a result of that, that you determine what portion of it relates to Hannaford versus other development. There are other projects in the area directly across the road, and certainly on the same side of the road, there are other projects and other developments. So long as the studies are designed in a way that we look at clearly what portion of the issue is created by Hannaford, I think we're fine with a post-construction monitoring project, so that if there are issues, we're not on the hook for solving problems that in fact others have created. I'm not a traffic engineer, as you know, but as I've dealt with traffic for all my career, it's almost always an issue. And one of the fundamental questions is our trip generation within what we've projected? And if we're seeing increased volumes beyond that, I think it's pretty safe to say that the problems, if they occur, are not being created by us. That's my simplistic view, but so long as that kind of distinction's in there, I think doing monitoring afterwards, we're fine with.
I would like to respond quickly, briefly, to the safety concern. And there are indeed in the most recent high crash location report published by VTrans, 2 high crash locations. The first one begins just south of Silver Street and extends north through Charlotte Road, but not quite as far as Mechanicsville Road. That particular segment, I submit to you, is a false positive, because if you take out the intersection crashes, which the intersections themselves are not high crash locations. If you take out the intersection crashes at Silver Street and Charlotte Road, that segment no longer meets the criteria to be a high crash location. The second high crash location starts just south of Commerce Street and extends northerly another 0.3 of a mile. That high crash location is a little bit different. The crashes at the intersection are not a significant part of that high crash segment. Instead, what's happening there is out of the 27 crashes, about 18 or 19 of those are rear-end collisions on 116 that are caused by distracted driving, following too close. And that's the direct result of the queuing that you see every day. People are not paying attention and they're rear-ending each other. The improvements to Charlotte Road will help that queuing, will help move traffic through, hopefully will eliminate some of that stop and go traffic. One of the points, though, that I do want to make is that you will hear later that the change in the left turn phasing, the change in the phasing at Charlotte Road from split phasing to concurrent phasing will reduce safety. The left turns at these intersections are not the issue. It's rear-end traffic, rear-end collisions caused by stop and go traffic, basically. Thank you.
So I did have a couple questions. The current proposed left-hand turn lane, southbound left-hand turn lane, first, what is the current length of that's been proposed?
I'm not 100% sure. I believe it's 100 to 125 feet, somewhere
Okay.
in that, 4 to 5 car storage.
Currently proposed, I thought was 185.
Oh, I'm sorry. What's your
He was
proposal?
asking the proposed lot.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, 185.
185. And how many feet short of the culvert of the bridge, whatever, does that stop? Or does that go, I'm just trying to picture
Full
it.
width lane stops considerably short of the culvert. Then you have your tapers
Okay.
that extend further north. And those end if you pull up, I don't know, C6, I think, is that
So
available?
what I'm kind of getting at is, are we pinning ourselves in a corner, or do we have some margin, some room to extend it further if in the future it
There's
appears we
some
need
extra
to?
room available there.
Okay.
There's at least 25.
Well, the
If
pinch
not
point
more.
is the bridge.
Pinch point's the bridge.
Yeah.
And so the assumption is that you couldn't even have a taper across the bridge. I assume it's not wide enough to even start a taper. Is that a correct?
Yeah, that's basically correct.
Okay. So,
Mitch, if all you have is what I gave you last time we were here.
I do have some other
If you
stuff.
got the full application, you have C6. If you only have what I gave you last time, I only brought those things I was going to present on.
Right, I have the full application, just in a different spot, which, apologize just a moment.
Our understanding, sorry to interrupt, but our understanding is that C6 was part of the original application from years ago. It has not been resubmitted as part of this package.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen C6.
So this is Jim Dumont addressing the audience.
Which one's C6, what's that?
That's the left turn lane on 116. C4 is Commerce Street. Try C4, bring that up, see what that looks like. Yeah, that's Commerce Street.
C4 does show it, but there's no distances. Mitch, C4 does show the striping plan for 116. You can show. Doesn't have all the dimensions, but it shows it.
Presently, the tapers end about 50 feet south of the box culvert.
okay, so you could basically get about a 50-foot extension of what's been proposed, the 185. Okay. So the other, on page 1 of the technical memorandum, it shows that, the traffic counts in 2008 were higher, and in 2010, 2012, 2015, I'd call those consistent, 8,600, 8,500, 8,600. So there's some drop. Is there any theory as to why traffic seems to have dropped? Has construction on Route 7 gone away and people are going back to Route 7? Can we expect it to shoot back up as quickly as it went down? Any ideas why?
One of the primary factors affecting traffic volume statewide has been gas prices. When gas prices go up, traffic volumes go down, and vice versa. And that's the trend, not just even, that's nationwide, actually. So,
Okay.
that and the economy are the two big reasons for the traffic volumes being lower than what they were in 2008.
Okay, so things get better, the traffic goes back up.
Yes, and we are starting to see that on a very small scale.
Okay. And to the question of the high, was it high collision?
High crash.
High crash. When I was reading through that earlier, I was wondering, I assume a crash is a crash. They don't take out for reasons why. You were mentioning that, inattention or whatever is, so no improvement to an intersection is going to fix somebody's attention. So I was wondering, when they're looking at what are problem intersections, do they typically take out certain crashes due to cause, or it's just a crash is a crash is a crash?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
I have another question that partially our group, maybe on the board, but on Commerce Street, I have to say that I'm not fully comfortable with the widening because of the 2-lane and the fact that we'll have a standing queue and turning left through a standing queue. And so it's on that C4 for the right-hand turn lane, and that people will be turning into the gas station there. Is that really necessary to widen for that right-hand turn? Are we going to increase the queue to a degree that I think is, I would rather tolerate personally the extra queuing on Commerce Street than deal with a potential introducing a crash and safety risk. So I don't know how you perceive, do you think this is introducing a new risk into this area?
With the proposed markings and do not block intersection, I think that certainly would help prevent that from occurring, that basically increasing the accident risk. I think as time evolves, people will tend to enter via the further curb cut and exit the one closest to 116. There is already, at least the curb cut closest to 116, already 2 lanes there. And so really this...
But you're not turning through, because there's nobody coming along the queue in that today.
Right.
In the existing configuration, nobody's traveling parallel to a queue and you're turning through a queue. So that's my concern, and I think if that's something for us to have a discussion about, and maybe if that's possible to just, for you either to be comfortable to say this is the effect of this, take it or leave it, that's something for us to reflect upon. I'm stating my hesitation toward this improvement.
The queue is already like 600 feet long, even with the right-hand turn lane, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
How long does that go up Mechanicsville?
Commerce, you mean?
Yeah, Commerce, excuse me.
How far does 600 feet go, you mean?
Yeah.
Don't know the answer.
Does it go pretty much to the tail hook?
Can you tell us what 600 feet along Commerce would put you?
How far does that 600 feet back up on Commerce Street? Benchmark of where driveways are. Do you know what that answer is?
I assume it doesn't block tail hook. or
So
does
you're
it?
asking about in the event that the Mechanicsville Road
No, I think
traffic
that's,
is,
I think that's without Mechanicsville Road
No,
traffic
it's
diverted.
It's with
Oh, it's with?
diverted,
with the
left.
diverted.
yeah.
I believe that goes about as far as can you, Mitch, move that so that we can see further east? We'll keep going a little bit further. So I believe that takes you to the vicinity of the entrance to the mini storage.
Wow.
So
It's at least
we're
right in this
looking,
area.
so we've, in the prior approval, this board approved the widening as far as the tailhook towing entrance. And that would take us here. Potentially, it would make sense to extend it all the way to the entrance where the bank is. And so it's really this area between those two entrances, maybe this area as well.
So potentially it could be stacked back even into the entrance.
Sarah, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Oh, sorry, so potentially it seems like,
Maybe you're leaning one way and your microphone's
trying to
the
see.
other. So.
It could potentially be stacked back to the entrance into Hannaford?
Not into the entrance, but in this vicinity. That takes it back into this area. And for a taper and for just ease, you might choose to extend the widening that far, but the queues themselves would come back into this area.
Keep in mind, this is the maximum queue that occurs in a 1 hour period. When we look at, say, a 95th percentile queue, which is what the other analysis comes up with, that's a queue length that occurs, that lasts only 3 minutes out of the 1 hour period. Okay, the average queue lengths are much, much less. So.
Wouldn't the expectation be that the majority of that traffic that's exiting Commerce, turning right, would have come from Hannaford's? Because I mean, I'm kind of getting the impression that people are thinking that if you went around Mechanicsville Road and then came back in this side to try to beat some traffic, wouldn't you be most likely turning left to go south instead of turning right to go back where you came from?
No, it would be all the people that are coming from the north, anyone that comes down North Williston Road or that can't make a left onto 116 anymore off from Mechanicsville has to go down Commerce.
Oh, with the diverted Mechanicsville, yeah.
We actually estimated that the majority of
anybody from the
Hannaford
north.
traffic will be exiting to the south, will make the left turn. The added length of the right turn movement is really for the convenience of other traffic besides Hannaford traffic.
Okay.
Well, it reduces the queues, the basic queue too, because it takes all that southbound traffic out of that queue that you have on Commerce Street.
Let me put it a slightly different way, if I may, and correct me if I'm wrong, Roger, but I think the widening for the right turn lane really is to prevent a longer queue in the left turn through lane from blocking people from getting into the right lane. It's not that the right lane actually needs that distance for its own queue. It's the queue for that right turn lane is much, much shorter. But if the left turn and through lane extends all the way back, and I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I heard somebody say 600 feet, then it would block somebody from getting in and taking advantage of being able to take that right-hand turn. Did I get that right, Roger?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
So to that extent, to your question, if you aren't concerned about the convenience of those people making the right-hand turn, then the widening is less significant. But, we were looking at how do you help traffic flow as smoothly as we can.
I think to reiterate my suggestion that there is poor levels of service throughout this area and that we should be mindful of not creating safety implications while still having somewhat poor levels of service.
So Alex, are we staying on schedule or are we getting off tilt?
I think I'm done.
I think you're doing great. I anticipate Dennis is about to ask if there are any further board questions, and if not, move on to the other expert testimony. But Dennis, it's really up to you.
Any other board members? All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to open it up to the public, and I believe we have some more expert testimony. So I'll have you start first. And just remind you that we have written testimony. We'd like to keep it to 5-10 minutes, please.
Mr. Bruno, Ms. Coleman, I just want to preface their comments by giving the chairman 2 additional sets of petitions. I
Okay.
emailed copies of this to the applicant. And I also want to respond briefly to some of the sort of procedural or legal issues that have already come up today.
Jim, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Okay.
Maybe
There
you
is a
could,
mic floating around too.
possess that microphone a little more personally.
How's this?
Yeah, much
That's
better.
better.
Thank you. I also want to respond to maybe place in legal perspective some of Mr. Slason's comments. And I don't blame you for not having the Supreme Court's opinion, in this case, completely memorized. We'll forgive you that this time only. If you look at paragraph 82, 83, and 84 of the Supreme Court's opinion in this case, they actually address your suggestion. And for better or for worse, it can't be done. The Supreme Court in paragraphs 82, 83, and 84 talked about the impact of the so-called treetop decision. And I expect you to run this by Mr. Rue, who will know this better than I do. But Mr. Rue will undoubtedly look at paragraph 84 in particular, and I'll now read you paragraph 84. Thus, our decision in treetop does not preclude a condition requiring a permit applicant to perform a post-development study of traffic conditions to assure that specific evidence-based performance standards are met. The Environmental Division, the court, must in the first instance determine based on sufficient evidence that particular permit conditions will likely satisfy the statutory requirements. In other words, you have to make the decision now in this case. You can't put it off to the future and see if it works or it doesn't work. You have to make a finding it's going to work now in this case. Having so concluded, the court may require the permittee to take predetermined specific actions as a result of the failure to meet the performance standards. Whether or not a permit includes such predetermined follow-up actions in the absence of a permit amendment, the permittee's failure to meet the performance standards outlined in the permit conditions becomes a matter for enforcement proceedings. The point just being, you have to make a decision now based on burdens of proof and what's before you, and you can do a post-permit process, but in this case, you have to decide what the remedy will be in the future.
I agree.
Thanks.
Yeah, I agree with that, too.
Thank you. Go ahead.
My name's John Bruno. I'm a licensed professional engineer in Vermont, and I've been doing traffic studies and other engineering functions for the over 50 years.
Mr. Bruno, we've had a couple of different levels of review, both here and in the environmental court in this case, with traffic studies. Were you involved in any of those prior processes?
I did testify before the environmental court.
Okay.
As my understanding is that this is a new application, and as such, I strongly feel that an updated traffic study should be done and required. We're looking at 2019 traffic analysis, which is 6 months away. The typical requirements by the VTrans guidelines is that you do an analysis for the year that the project opens and 5 years out. That was not done in the original 2013 study, and certainly we don't have that information at this time. This is a very, very difficult project to evaluate because everything is sort of outdated and disjointed. We get a 2013 traffic study. We have a series of memos that came out during the various hearing process or previous hearing process. We had a May 4th memo that we had no backup information for other than just the results. So we weren't able to really review and evaluate that. VTrans guidelines require that, as I said, year opening, they prefer local trip generation rates rather than using the ITE trip generation manual. And in this case, it's possible to do local trip generation. Did not analyze mitigation options and did not use most current highway capacity in the manual in the original analysis. As Mr. Dickinson indicated, they did in the follow-up May 4th memo and in the tables that were presented this evening that we haven't even seen yet. But we haven't any of the backup information for that. I disagree with the trip generation rates that Mr. Dickinson used. The ITE trip generation report provides trip generation rates in a number of ways. One, it gives you the minimum, gives you the maximum, and in this case, the minimum was a little bit over 5 trips per 1,000 square feet, and the maximum was around 20 or a little bit more than 20 trips per 1,000 square feet, and the average was 10. What I looked at, and there's a regression equation that's prepared for the data that's collected and plotted, and that equation is available in the report. And what I did was to take Lantman's trip generation rate, which was in the original report, and applied to 14,000, I believe, 700 square feet of Lantman to the trip generation equation. And the numbers that came out from that trip generation equation were within 5% of the actual Lantman's trip generation rates. Applying the equation to the Hannaford project would indicate that there would be 83 more trips than was analyzed in the 2013 study and subsequent analyses that were presented tonight and in the May 4th memo. So I believe that the trip generation is underestimated for this project. VTrans guidelines state where roadways are inadequate, mitigation must be studied, proposed, and addressed. None of the studies did that other than offering a $25,000 contribution to future improvements for Mechanicsville Road, which is actually only for a 5-year period. So basically, that probably is meaningless because I'm sure that probably nothing would be done within 5 years anyways. That the analysis be based on the current highway capacity manual, that the study, and the study did not analyze, the 2013 study did not analyze for the year that the project opened. It only did it for the 5 years out. And it's important to do that to know what improvements need to be made at the time that the project opens. The analysis, it was the actual level of service analysis and the simulation did not, in my opinion, adequately predict the existing. Well, it predicted queue lengths for the 2019 back in 2013, and those queue lengths were actually less than what actually is experienced. I don't have to tell the board what kind of queue lengths you experience there, basically. And it's not only for the 1 hour. We analyze for a design hourly volume, which is the maximum, but the period from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., there is some variation in the traffic in those 3 hours, but not necessarily significant differences. So that, and I'm sure that you've all experienced it, that those queues and that the congestion that does exist on 116 isn't only for the design hour, but in fact for a 3-hour period. We have no plans were submitted with this application to show the improvements on Vermont 116. There was discussion on what was going to be done, what it would look like. It's all verbal. We don't have a plan that's been submitted that can be reviewed either by ourselves or VTrans for those improvements. Previous plans did incorrectly calculate the length of tapers because of the lane shift. The original lane shift, the analysis was based on 5.5 feet, and actually it's 1 to 3 feet, difficult to tell from the PDFs that were provided on the computer, but that would extend the length of the taper. Also, standards require that when you're in a speed transition zone, that you don't immediately slow down when that sign comes in, but there's a transition period, and that those guidelines say that you should use a higher speed. Trip generation, again, we have more trips, therefore we'd be extending the queue length longer. The levels of service, as Jonathan indicated, are in the unacceptable range at Commerce Street and Mechanicsville and Silver Street. And that, again, we don't know the impact on Patrick Brook Culvert because we don't have a design plan. We don't have a corrected design based on the actual lane shift. And we don't have the analysis. The level of service is there's a safety issue also in the changing of the phasing, that when you do the left turn lane with a permitted yellow arrow, there's a greater potential for conflict in those. You are reducing the queue length, but there's also bigger chance of crashes as a result of the conflict between the left turn move and the through northbound move. Mechanicsville, again, there's been no analysis done other than the one analysis of the extended queue length and the difference in levels of service to Commerce Street with diverted traffic. The queue that was indicated in the diverted traffic is 636 feet. One thing that was not added into that 636 feet is the blocked out areas at the drives where you have a 30-foot blocked out area that you don't want to block those drives, which results in an additional 120 feet. So you end up with the 756-foot length queue, which actually backs it up past the Hannaford driveway or access.
All right. You get a couple more minutes to wrap it up?
Okay. Charlotte Road, again, there's going to be permitted left turns, which creates a greater potential for crashes. Silver Street, 116 goes to a level of service E, degrades it to a level of service E with a build scenario, and there's been no mitigation indicated for that. One of the other most important ones, safety issues, are the turning movements, truck turning movements at the Commerce Street intersection. There's been no turning movement analysis provided. In earlier turning movement that I've seen shows trucks that are exiting Commerce Street and turning right to go north actually have to go into the through left turn lane to make the turn and still encroach on the stop bar of the left turn southbound lane on Route 116, which creates a potential for gridlock during the peak hour periods. As it's been identified, Vermont 116 is identified as high crash locations. That's been done by the Agency of Transportation. You can't willy-nilly take out accidents because you want to get it down below HCL. A crash is a crash, and that's in the calculation to determine the high crash locations. It's basically from Charlotte Street Road to Commerce Street with a little break at Mechanicsville. In conclusion, the existing Hannaford TIA is inadequate and outdated. It is not possible to prepare an adequate and meaningful evaluation of what is being proposed.
So, Mr. Chairman, can I bite off a big chunk of what we've just heard?
Sure.
What you've testified to and what we heard a month ago presents conundrums for me as a single board member and probably for at least the non-engineers on the board. We have a lot of technical testimony that conflicts, and it's hard for us to kind of process it all and figure out where to come down. But with respect to traffic, I guess you weren't involved in the original application, but it's my recollection we had traffic studies by the applicant, traffic studies by the people who were opposed to the application, and then we as a town engaged independent experts who basically concluded that the applicant's traffic assessments were within the ballpark. And then it went to the environmental court, and it's my understanding that the applicant had traffic studies, Responsible Growth had traffic studies, and the select board engaged another independent evaluator. And there was basically assessment, as I understand it, that the applicant's traffic studies were within the ballpark. Now we're back here. We're hearing applicants' traffic studies, opponents' traffic studies. We may well talk later about whether we want to get a third opinion. I'm trying to figure out, as a non-engineer, how to process all this stuff. And are you identifying any flaws in the models that traffic engineers use about what's happening in Hinesburg? As a citizen, traffic is bad, it's only going to get worse. That's my uninformed opinion. But I have to base any decision on regulations. And are you saying there are flaws in the science behind the models? Or are you saying they just haven't considered enough variables, X, Y, and Z, and if they go back and cross all the T's and dot the I's, we'll get there? And
Well, there are guidelines and standards.
how do we process all this stuff, really?
It's not easy, believe me.
You'll help me as best you can.
That's right. And I've been on your side of the table many times. I've served on planning boards for over 20 years and our zoning board, and it isn't easy. There are guidelines. There's VTrans guidelines for levels
Can
of
we
service.
talk about models?
Models.
Are you basically using the
I think
same models in your agreement
I
on
think-
what
well,
happens
I think
in
the
a very
ori-
general dynamic
the
sense?
original study did not use the model that are recommended by the VTrans guidelines, as I
We're
understand.
past
it.
the
And
original models, I think.
And the testimony that I heard tonight is that the new analysis, which we have not seen the data for or the backup information for, has used the appropriate models, but we haven't seen that. I think some of the models, for the most part, are the best we've got to deal with. I think when you reach, and Jonathan may be able to enlighten you on some of this, is I think when you
He
get...
can't testify.
When you, understood. When you get to the point where things start to break down, where you get to capacity, when you get to low levels of service, when you get queues building up, I think there's some breakdown in the models. And that may be an explanation as to why the queues that are indicated in the 2019 analysis are, and again, that was 5 years out from 2013.
But let me interrupt you just a second. If you're saying there are breakdowns in the models, I still hear you're saying the applicant hasn't asked the right questions on 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 subjects. If they ask those questions, are the models going to help us understand what's going to happen?
I think that we have low levels of service, which are created, which are calculated through the models, which is the best, like I said, the best we've got. You've got long queue buildups. I think maybe it's in the conclusions that are reached as a result of the data that, or the results of the analysis that you do where we differ. But the models in this case of the 2013 study did not produce the queue lengths in the analysis that you're actually experiencing on the ground.
I think you have someone to your right who wants to say something.
Go ahead, Michael.
I would like to say something briefly. Microphone. Oh, sure. Maybe. My name is Michael Oman. I'm a transportation planning consultant. I have been involved in modeling for a number of years, and there are several pieces of this puzzle, but the most important piece is that any model must be able to reproduce the conditions that are observed on the ground. If it can't model what's there, it can't model anything about what's going to come down the pike. And right now we know that the analysis that has been provided as part of this study has said that the maximum queues that you'll get from Charlotte Road will extend back as far as Mechanicsville. And that's going to be the maximum queue that you're going to get out of it. As I came in tonight, the queue was probably up to about NRG. So instead of a 900-foot queue, we're looking at a roughly 3,000-foot queue. So unless you can actually reproduce an existing set of circumstances, you can't then predict what the following set of circumstances are going to be. And any model, especially simulation models, can be calibrated. It's very typical to adjust parameters that go into these things that can begin to produce different results. And in fact, the applicant did that at one time when an adjustment was made to saturated flow rates, as I recall. But we're still not capturing what's actually on the ground. You need to capture what's on the ground, or else the information is not reliable. And we're trying to surmise what's going to be coming out of this with something that isn't reproducing what we actually see.
But won't that change if Lampman's isn't there anymore and they change the light?
Well, of course it will change, but we have
So how
no
would we be able to
mechanism.
get it on the ground then?
We have no mechanism for understanding what that change will be.
So
Unless
how
we can,
would you get it?
what you need to be able to do is get the model to reproduce what you actually see.
Well, as far as Lampman's is concerned, something else may go in there that, I know that I believe that the traffic study, the original traffic study, kept the traffic from Lampman's. You know, something may go in there which generates less traffic. Something may go in there that generates more traffic. I mean, that's.
To that point, doesn't Lampman's, or Hannaford's have an option to buy Lampman's, and in theory, they could determine what goes in there. I'm not sure that's all that
It was
indeterminate.
my understanding that they would only buy the business, I mean, you guys could correct me, could only buy the business, not the facility. So the people would still own that and be able to determine what goes in there independent of Hannaford's, but the grocery business.
I'm not sure that was my understanding from, a millennium ago, but.
But I really truly believe that, there should be an updated traffic study that will analyze it at the time that the project opens and 5 years out. Right now, we don't have that. We don't even have a full analysis of what's happening now, except for the May 4th memo, and we have no backup to analyze, and it's still kind of very iffy. So I really, truly believe that a new traffic analysis is required to follow the VTrans guidelines that the original study did not.
So to the point of queues appearing longer than the study seems to indicate, I seem to recall the first time we went around on this, I had asked the question that you know, appearances are that the queues are longer, and I believe the answer at the time was the software only considers it queued if you're less than 7 mile per hour or 3 mile per hour, 7. So I don't know, has that changed at all, or is that still the definition of a queue? You're under 7 miles per hour?
There are mile per hour limits set on, I don't remember exactly what they are, but I mean, when I pulled into the queue this evening from Commerce Street, basically it was stopped. And it was stopped back well beyond Commerce Street, which is 2,000 feet from the intersection. And perhaps another 1,000 feet. So obviously, we're not capturing, exactly what the adjustments will be necessary to make that model reflected. I don't know off the top of my head, certainly. But nonetheless, when the model doesn't reflect what you're actually seeing, you can't rely on the results, like when we try to analyze what happens if Lampman's changes, for example, or what happens if we have a higher trip generation rate, or what happens if we change the distribution of traffic from Mechanicsville. All of those things won't be reflected either.
Thank you.
Board members have any other questions?
Well, I think I agree that we don't have predictions to 2025 or so, which would be the 5-year point, right?
That's right, we don't.
And I heard a good deal of discussion about the left turn lane off of 116, which wasn't, the plan for which hasn't been submitted as part of this application, as near as we've been able to determine. So we've kind of refrained from a more detailed discussion of, how tapers would be accommodated and what the speed limit changes are and how that relates to the VTrans standards associated with that, because it's not even part of this submission.
The C6 doesn't appear to be, well, it may have been submitted now. What is your take on my comment about the right-hand turn on Commerce? and that potential? Is there a safety implication? Have you considered that element of that design?
We haven't certainly, because that wasn't proposed, and I mean, our task is to review what's been submitted. You'd have to analyze what the impacts would be of that. I mean, as I said, that with traffic being diverted from Mechanicsville, if in fact that's the mitigation that's proposed, it backs up traffic beyond the Hannaford driveway. If you add in now the right turns into that queue, what does it do? So again, that's what's missing from the original study, and we really haven't seen, other than the May 4th memo where it relists the mitigation that was proposed by VTrans with a few comments relative to the advantages or disadvantages of each one of those. But they really haven't been analyzed to the point where an adequate choice. As a matter of fact, in that memo, it said we lean toward doing nothing. And, we'll look at it in 5 years. And then how do you implement the plans, the improvements that are necessary if, in fact, that study shows that improvements have to be made? So I think as Jim indicated, those decisions really have to be made at this point.
Any other questions? Were you also going to make a presentation, or?
No, I'm just sort of back up.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
So I'm going to open it up to the public, and please have your comments related to traffic. And try to hold it to 5 minutes.
Each?
Dennis, do you want me to bring the mic around, or would you like people to come to the table?
Bring the mic around.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who would you like to call on first, Dennis?
Again, state your name, please.
Hello, evening. My name is George Damron. I think many of you know me. I'm resident of Hinesburg since 1988, and I live across the street at the Yellow House. And I wanted just to indicate, I've heard many of the same points made today that I just wanted to support. I agree. Actually, I think there's lived experience of those of us who live here, and that lived experience is very, very unsettling. From St. Michael's College, where I'm a history professor, it really takes me as long as to drive from St. Michael's College to the outskirts of Hinesburg as it does from the outskirts of Hinesburg to my house right across the street. I expect it's only going to get worse in the next few years. That's the lived experience, but I realize that we have to work with regulations, we have to work with rules. So I just am here to reiterate, I think, some of the points I've heard before. I just urge the DRB to try to do, to the best of your judgment, to collect the best data that you possibly can and project it into the next few years, and then hopefully require as conditions of approval that those mitigations be made or planned, because this is a village for which there's really no adequate infrastructure for the level of development we're getting. We need all the data we can possibly get, absolutely the most accurate data and the facts as possible on which to make an informed judgment. I don't envy your responsibility, but I do hope that we'll be able to move forward with some indication of where we're headed if this project is ultimately approved.
I'm just going to add, I did receive your letter that you sent, but it was not in time to get to the board this time. There'll be a next one.
Next closest.
Hello, Mary Beth Bowman. My question would be to the applicant. At the state Supreme Court hearing, the applicant had said that the traffic was an F, and it couldn't get much worse because it was already at its worst. I'm wondering if they still feel that if it's an F, just because there's not a GHIJKL or F minus minus minus, I wonder if they still feel that. One of the judges was like, really? That's what you're... So, again, I'll reiterate that I hope maybe they have changed their position on that it can't get any worse than an F.
Well, just for clarification, my understanding or recollection is grades were assigned, but they were all to intersections, and there were different grades for different intersections, and they could have different impacts on different concerns for various citizens, but
I think each turn movement has a certain grade as well.
but the applicant can certainly speak to that more intelligibly than I.
Yeah, just to point out that those grade levels are indicated on screen to the extent you can read that. That's a table that the applicant presented and constitutes their testimony.
Not everything was an F.
Now, I don't think, is the Mechanicsville Road intersection there? Mechanicsville Road 116?
Yeah, it's just Commerce.
Yeah, I apologize. It does not include that intersection.
Right, and I think that went from D to F, if my recollection is correct.
Well, maybe I'll move the mic in the applicant's direction if the board would like to hear from them on that. Obviously questions come to you and then you bounce them back. But I believed that it is existing F.
It's an F and it remained an F?
And it remains that. But would you like the applicant to address that? I'm happy to pass the mic.
If your assessment is incorrect, if it wasn't an F, if it's not currently an F, then they're free to correct the information.
Isn't the point that there are different grades for different intersections and movements, and nothing has changed, really?
Okay.
Or at least it's still under further review.
I'm Wade Snyder, and I live in Thistle Hill, and I live right near the Mechanicsville Commerce Street intersection. My son uses that cross with his friends. I'm concerned that that's not included in here. It only took me a half an hour to read John Bruno's memorandum. You can get it online. And I saw glaring questions in it, and I urged everybody on the DRB to at least read it. And then I think I support John Bruno in that I think we should get more studies done. I think that 5-year out, I was here in 2010. I bought my house back then. I remember when Hannaford's first made the application and I came to the town hall and I was concerned about traffic primarily. And this has been an ongoing issue. It's not something new, but I think that the 5-year traffic study is outdated. It's old-fashioned. It needs to be updated to reflect changes in our traffic patterns. And I also, just to conclude, I think we should support John Bruno in getting a reassessment on this, particularly as it concerns the fact that this is a much bigger store that's going in than what Lampman's is. It's going to be much more traffic than what Lampman's generates.
Thank you.
Bob Thiefels. I was picking up on that 83 more trips, and that may occur. And the other thing I picked up was that the model must produce the conditions on the ground, or else it's really not a very good model at all. And it seems that Hannaford isn't producing what's on the ground at this point. What I want to add to that is that if this store is built here, we have to consider as well traffic that isn't even coming into Hinesburg at this point. And I don't know how that can be factored into the model. But we're going to get people from St. George who, instead of going to Williston, Hannaford, would come to this Hannaford store. We're going to get people coming up from the south and having to go around the corner there in Silver Street. That's going to be another big problem there. We're going to get maybe the traffic on Shelburne road, Shelburne Falls Road, coming into Hinesburg to go to the Hannaford store. And we're going to, so this traffic, we don't even know. And I don't know how we can assess that in a model, but we have to do that in order for this to work, and in order for us not to be completely flummoxed down the road. We're going to have serious problems if we can't, because these people will be coming into the Hannaford store if it is the great superstore that they say that it's going to be.
I'm Bill Marks. I certainly didn't intend to talk tonight, but I share the concerns about the long-term impact, and I would like to simply relate my memory, and it should be all on record at the previous hearings, the previous application, where Hannaford had in an early hearing, had their introductory speaker, and I don't recall his name. I remember he was sort of red hair, middle-aged, but he gave the introduction. It was a prepared speech. It was not off the cuff. He was clearly knew what he was talking about, and pertaining to traffic, he said that there would be a minimal impact immediately, and over the first few years, was what he stated, it was be small. But then he said, after about 5 years, there would be a surge. Now that woke me up, and when it came time for public questioning, I asked the traffic engineer what he meant, what it was. And in fact, I asked him twice, and he responded twice, but he didn't answer the question. And I remember, because when I sat down, Bill Libbert, who's sitting next to me right now, was sitting behind me and looked rather angrily at me and said, "He didn't answer your question." Well, I did, either during the intermission or after the hearing, talk to another representative of theirs in a suit, young, stocky fellow. I don't know if he was a lawyer, but I asked him about what was meant by this surge, and he just sort of angrily said to me, we're not sharing our model with you. I didn't even know I was asking for a model. But it did significantly raise my concern, which was there to begin with. This is basically the same application, as I understand. And we're going to be here for more than a couple of years after Hannaford's gets going. So we're going to be here 5, 10, 15 years or longer. Thanks.
Thank you. All right.
My name is Catherine Goldsmith, and I've followed all these twisted turns for 7.5 years as close as I think as a layperson can. And the main thing, and I will write a letter. But what I really want to say is, it seems inappropriate for the board to consider anything where we're referring to the past proceedings. I mean, 2 of the gentlemen sitting here today weren't here. They don't remember, they weren't here for this. I don't see how you can consider it if in these discussions and with the questions we're referring back to information that's not a part of the submission. There was a document that showed where the proposed customers were coming from. That's very important information. That hasn't been submitted. And there was other information that came out later in the process, the first time around, that you all don't have. I don't see how you can make a decision without a full set of information. And just the last thing to say about traffic is, in the Supreme Court decisions, because I know it's not Sunday morning reading, it said there was no debate that the traffic situation would be exacerbated. Thanks.
Andrea Morganti. I know you're talking about traffic, but the traffic, the mitigation for the traffic means adding lanes. means more impervious surface. And I think that it's really important that the applicant present information about how the stormwater will be treated from this additional lanes and impervious surface, and how that will impact it. So far, we've really only heard about stormwater on site, the parking lot, but the additional lanes will become responsibility of the town and the town's right-of-way. So I think it's important that we remember that traffic generates more impervious surface as well.
Johanna White. I'm projecting past this building being erected, and what we fear most comes to fruition, and we have to clean it all up. This could go on forever. I mean, we could end up in a really bad situation in this town if some of these things that people are projecting do come to pass.
My name's Carl Bolin, and this is sort of a difficult project because it's been very divisive to our community. And I offer my comments in total respect to those who support Hannaford's, but I do need to speak because I feel Hannaford's will change my community in a dramatic way. But I'll just talk about traffic at this point. I'm sort of convinced that experts aren't needed. The traffic's pretty bad now, and if this store is really being intended for Hinesburg, and we get I get a marketing study that shows we need this largest store for Hinesburg, traffic probably isn't a problem. But if this is a regional store like most of the others, there's going to be a lot more traffic, and it's going to have to be dealt with. And the reason I say I'm not sure you need to have experts, let's take Williston, Taft's Corner, experts testified, and there were improvements proposed, and that was not even in the ballpark to what actually happened, and there was a very expensive amount of dollars to fix the problem of all the traffic in Williston. And I don't want us to be in that position. So I urge you to, as part of considering this, that you get Hannaford's marketing plan that shows who will be served by the store. And that might help a lot with how much traffic will be generated. And some other speakers have talked about who will this draw from other communities. And if you do grant the permit, and I urge you to deny it, I would include something similar to this. I think you should require Hannaford's to put funds in escrow that will cover the cost to correct the traffic deficiencies that don't actually get corrected by the improvements. If they're confident that their consultants and their experts are right, this shouldn't be anything they would object to. But if there are problems, then you as the town, or we as the town, will have the money to actually make those improvements. One other suggestion, the right queue on Commerce Street, I urge you to have the right lane start at Frost Beer, because if you're in line, you can just go there and wait for the line to get shorter.
Hi, I'm Peter Erb. Just a few quick points. The left-hand turn, as you make the left-hand turn off of 116 and go down Commerce Street, the no standing place in front of Jolly frequently, I mean, I shouldn't say frequently, but numerous times I've evidenced it, and I'm not in town that much, where somebody has pulled into that area, and it creates an immediate jam because no one can leave Route 116 until that clears up, and the light is red, so it can't clear up. So no matter how much signage you have, it's an area that really could cause very quick problems. When I look at the length of this queue and think about other businesses along Commerce Street, now I know they should probably be here defending themselves, but I think it's also up to the DRB to think about the impact of traffic on these other businesses if you can't get in and out of those driveways that are on the north side of Mechanicsville. The business models of supermarkets appear to be changing, where it's much more pickup for prepackaged things. And I think that hopefully any permit approval would include something where Hannaford would have to come back and offer a new traffic study on the possibility that this new sort of business model or morph into something other than driving in and personally doing your shopping. I think you should think about that ahead of time and make sure that they have to come back in, that it can't just slide in as some kind of a non-change. The other thing is that if, and I hope you certainly do have more traffic studies, if a future traffic study finds that in fact there is going to be, for some weird reason, less traffic than was permitted, I don't think that should be a justification for Hannaford to be able to do things that possibly are causing more problems. The town should also have the opportunity to, and you guys should really put the wood to Hannaford and make them do the right thing so that the town traffic might possibly improve if there's less traffic, not let Hannaford consume the improvements and justify that, well, we aren't making it any worse than we originally proposed. I think, the other thing is any time that no standing place is available, it's the only way you can pull out of Aubuchon's and get into that queue is to pop into that no standing thing, even though it's illegal, because otherwise you just don't get out. And there's a good possibility that even now with the Aubuchon entrance moved to the east, it's still going to be the same thing. The cars trying to get out of there, they're not going to be able to break into that queue. And what they're going to do is pop into that no standing thing, which immediately then blocks anybody trying to turn in. That's it. Thank you.
Hello, Barbara 4-Hour. As a resident of Hinesburg, there are certain hours of the day I recognize that I just do not go into the village, and all of you know that. I had the opportunity to walk from the United Church to the post office last Friday night, and I was appalled at the backup of the traffic. I hadn't been down there for a while, and this gentleman said that he saw the queue lined up to NRG. Well, it was past NRG and over the hill, and it was all stopped. So there obviously is a traffic problem, and we recognize that. And as Andrea pointed out, the impervious surface, we're so concerned about cleaning up Lake Champlain, and it's going to cost us millions of dollars to do so. Why create more impervious surface? And the trucks turning right off of Commerce Street onto 116, they need that extra space, so that lane probably is necessary. But again, impervious surface. And somewhere in my mind, I'm thinking we have a new zoning. No, I lost my train of thought. Anyway, thank you.
All right. It's almost 9:15, so I don't think we'll start on to the next item. I'm thinking we'll...
It's totally up to you guys, but I think if you started in, it would be tough to make a wrap by your 9:15 closure time. You may want to just pick up where we left off at the next meeting.
In the next meeting...
3 weeks from, 3 weeks from today.
It's your next regular meeting.
2 meetings from now.
No, it's your next regular meeting is June 5th.
All right.
And it's available at this time for continuance.
All right, I'll make a motion to continue both applications to June 5th.
Second.
Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all for coming.
Can I ask a question? My understanding is you've got the legal opinion from your attorney on the application is going to be reviewed under all the new criteria or not just certain criteria. And my understanding at the last meeting that this was discussed, the applicant's attorneys felt that that was wrong. So is everyone in agreement on this approach, or is there still a major dispute from the town's attorney and Hannaford's attorney that they feel that what you're doing is not what you should be doing? I just think we should have clarification if what happens, who's refereeing this and what issues
Okay,
are...
George, we did a discussion, and my recollection is we made a decision. I'm not at liberty to disclose that, but is that an issue?
I can speak to that without speaking for the applicant or Mr. Dumont, but the town and the other legal opinions from those parties are different. And there hasn't been any kumbaya circle where we've all come to agreement on that. But the DRB has discussed how they'd like to proceed, and they're going to proceed pursuant to the town's legal counsel's opinion. That doesn't eliminate the ability of any party to make an appeal of an eventual DRB decision based on the procedure that the DRB used. So I think that the applicant is going to retain their ability to make arguments on appeal if necessary. I would imagine Jim Dumont
So,
and
Alex, not
others
to
may
cut
as
you
well.
off, but I think the answer to Carl's question is we're going to proceed in accordance with our town attorney's advice.
Correct. Without any agreement with other folks.
I'll just stand.
Which means all issues under the current regulations are in play.
Right, but brief description of that is in the staff report that's available on the Dropbox. There were copies there. And if you want additional copies or want to be emailed, just contact us.
If Hannaford's were to prevail and find that this should not have been reviewed under the new existing regulations, but on the ones that was reviewed under before, what would that mean?
Peter, that entirely depends on what the environmental court and the Supreme Court say. And let's not waste any time tonight
Well, the only reason I ask
postulating
is,
about all that
I
stuff.
would hate to take the risk that we're
going to make a complete record on the current regulations. And that's the best we can do.
No, I understand that, but it seems like there is some risk, because if if they do prevail and we haven't testified based on the old regulations, then there's no testimony.
Well, I, for one board member, I'm not going to do this thing bifurcated, like we're going to render one decision under one set of regulations and another decision under another. So we just have to, we've made a decision to proceed under one set, whether we're right or wrong. Probably doesn't matter in the long run anyway, but the environmental court and the Supreme Court will decide.
The DRB is going to proceed as best as anybody can.
I would like to request that our staff work with the applicant to fill in the gaps in the traffic study application.
I would second that. Traffic study, site plan, so I've kind of been assuming that things are rolling in from the previous. If we're not seeing something new, it's the same as the old, but that's a bad assumption. So,
It is a bad assumption.
So we need everything, even if it's the same as presented the last time. So please make sure the record is complete.
Well, I think the applicants have heard that request, so they can respond.
And I think the 5-year addressing the comments made from Mr. Bruno about the post 5 years, that needs to be taken into account, particularly for the southbound left-hand turn lane.
I agree.
And probably the modeling.
Well, the traffic study in general, I think that needs to be taken into account. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. So we have a draft. After everyone clears out, we have to deal with that. It wouldn't surprise me if both sides Hinesburg.
Greg, you gonna get him out of here?
How's that? Come on, guys. We still have work to do.
Yeah, we still have some agenda items.
Some of it's going to be
yeah.
in deliberative session, so if you could go home, we'd like to too. Well done. Buy me a cattle prod, Dennis.
What's that?
Buy me a cattle prod.
Yeah.
Just a reminder.
We don't have to be in deliberative session for this, do we? It doesn't have to be closed. We can just talk about it, right? Yeah.
Town of Hinesburg Conditional Use Review. Has everybody
I looked through
had a
it.
chance to?
I found that succinct and well-written, so
Looked good to
I...
me.
Thank you.
Let's Second.
Everybody else had a chance.
I haven't read it.
Oh, go, read.
I've been a little focused on.
I have it in paper if you...
got it on Thursday.
I have it in paper if you want to read a real copy.
I actually do have one other thing just quickly to mention, but after this.
Okay.
But I often can't hear you, Mitch.
What?
I often can't hear you. You have a very soft voice, and you never yell at us.
Like a kid.
Never my intent.
You're going to have to change your behavior.
But then again, I am from New York, so I do know how to bring my voice up. And a former teacher, so.
Wouldn't know it by me.
My dad was a teacher. You could hear him across, 2 miles away.
But the best part is you got to know how to talk softly.
And I still can't hear
And
you.
then raise your voice, you get better reaction from that. But anyway. So motion,
So we got a motion to approve as written.
Any more
In
discussion?
a second, yep.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I did have a request from John as far as having the regs in a better place where it might be more available on your viewers. Is that something we could?
The first part of that. You did have
We're
a
very
request.
quiet.
Yes, I'm being very quiet here. John gave me a request earlier to put for having the regs in a more easier location place. I happened to throw it in the 2018. I just want
Yeah.
just want to know if there's other stuff that you might want to have available in the viewer. Or actually, we actually have the bylaws if you go back a certain
Yeah,
step
to
back.
DRB.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Just so everybody understands, in the digital world, you're very focused on your DRB 2018 folder, and then there's specific meetings in that. And you need to look at materials at this meeting as well as the 417 meeting for Hannaford, for example. But as Sarah mentioned, if you go a step back, there's another folder, I believe it's titled Other.
DRB.
Yeah, other DRB.
That contains the regulations so that you can find them on your machine. You just have to sort of go back a ways.
Yeah.
The nice thing about using Goodreader, I know a lot of you are just using Dropbox, is that when you open a document from one folder and then you go back to the main menu and open a document from a different folder, they both remain active and they show in tabs across the top of the screen. So you can have multiple documents from multiple folders open and quickly jump between them. But what John suggested to me, which I think is a great idea, is that Mitch and I work to see if we can insert hyperlinks into the staff report so that when we reference a regulation, you can just touch it and it will jump right to that section of the reg so you can read it. We will work on that and see if we can make that happen for you.
Thank you.
And then.
But how hard is that? Because it's easy for me to bring this book. And sometimes there may be a hyperlink to a section, but there are two other sections that are also relevant.
I agree, Greg. For me, it works real well to have a hard copy of the regs so I can go back and forth to it. But we'll still work on the hyperlink because I think it's technically possible. Just have to figure out how to do it.
You guys have enough to do. Certainly, for me, that's superfluous.
The regs don't change every week, so I think it's nice to have one paper copy.
And we're happy to print more. If anybody wants their own, don't need to do it on your home printer.
So as far as other suggestions, would it make sense, like under our 2018 folder, to start basically just a Hannaford folder, since these are multiple meetings?
I know, that's what I was wondering.
Instead of having them in a date.
Not necessarily instead of. I mean, it's still nice having them, by date, but to have a folder that basically, again, maybe links or something to the individual by date directories.
Oh,
You don't necessarily have to duplicate the
In
documents.
other words, we can have like a general big
Hannaford folder
that
that-
has everything in it.
Or
Yep.
shortcuts to where
Or
those
shortcuts
things are.
to where it
we
actually
can
is.
definitely do that.
Just for a big
that's easy.
application, that might make sense.
Yeah,
But this is only going to be 3 or 4, not 14 like last time.
Yeah, I mean,
Especially like accessing the old traffic report for this. I kept not being able to get that.
Yeah, it's in the April 17th folder.
I'm not sure that that's evidence at this point, though.
So the original 2013 traffic impact assessment was submitted for this application. So it is in evidence, it is in...
theirs was.
Yes.
But our expert,
Right.
Right.
The expert testimony from
Rick Bryant.
Rick Bryant is not part of the submittals. We can pull that back in for you. It all was a function of, the original review.
But I think we do have to be careful. What you're saying is we shouldn't take anything from that. I mean, it might be good just to, ring your bell, but I mean, not ring, ring your bell.
The thing is, just keep in mind, 4 of you were there for it, 3 of you were not.
Understood,
exactly.
and that's why, I mean, I'm sitting here recollecting things that were said, and as one person in the audience commented, it's like, well, there was a lot of people that weren't here for that. It's not really fair that you have this knowledge, and so it all needs to be rediscussed.
So I took your suggestion to heart. We will work with the applicant to get as much it back into the record for this review as possible. To date, they've essentially said, you're welcome to pull whatever you like from the original record. And my response to them has been, I'm not going to cherry pick for you what is going to be part of your application. Right. You need to formally submit what you want this board to consider. So we will work with them. If they say, Alex, Mitch, we are hereby submitting everything from the past review, we'll get that to you in a big Hannaford folder. As far as Rick Bryant's work as an independent traffic engineer for the board, anything that he provided to the prior board, I'm happy to resubmit to your board as a part of this application, understanding that anything that Hannaford generated since that time, he didn't look at. So for example, the 2015 addendum to the traffic impact assessment, Rick Bryant had no review of that. The May 4th, 2018 memo that we looked at a bit of tonight, Rick Bryant never saw that. So that speaks to the question of whether you want to have another independent engineer help you with this, or whether you want to just move this along and let that happen at the next level.
But one of the problems is that what they're saying in this memorandum is that their 5-year projection looked pretty good, but we actually don't have a 5-year projection from the time that the store will be built. We don't have a 2025 projection at this point, right?
Correct. It's 2019, and that's an interesting question about looking 5 years out from opening as opposed to just 2019.
Yeah, also, you don't have, just thinking of Rick, how he would actually respond to. He didn't. I don't think he actually had the benefit of the RGH people's testimony as well. I imagine a lot of that.
The original independent traffic engineer, correct. He had some of that, but not all of it.
I mean, I guess we could end up contacting somebody, but it almost seems like a prior report based on part of the information may not be as valued.
The RSG report, though, we do have access to, right?
We do, yep, and the RSG.
That one is the latest peer review
we have. And that, I believe...
That was May of 2015.
I think that takes into account the addendum from 2015.
That's
it
right.
doesn't take into account this diversion from Mechanicsville onto Commerce Street that was discussed in the May 4th memo of this year.
As far as like questions from the community, can you just add data points to when you have the study numbers? Because it is a model, can you just add data points of different places in town? Or do you have to have a whole new study to do that?
I'm not sure.
Are we able to talk about this right now? What are we able to talk about?
I thought we were really kind of just this. I mean, this discussion originally was
getting
what you need as far as on your laptop.
I think we need to figure out what we need more from the applicant and then talk amongst ourselves whether we need independent review of this. Let's get the complete packet from the applicant.
What we want from the applicant and have staff tell the applicant.
And how do we do that? When do we do that?
Right now.
right now?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, and I think we've heard it, and it is, you want more complete application materials. If that means resubmittal of the original application materials, that's fine. If it's something new, you'd like to see that. You're interested in more.
That was my question. That was why I was asking, do we have to have them have a whole new report just to ask for a few more data points?
Well, I think that without going into the specifics, Rod, the attempt in the May 4th memo of this year was the applicant's attempt to address any new data points with regard to new developments that have come online, differing signal specifications, the flashing yellow light and all that.
They have the responsibility of making the highest and best application on
This is
traffic
still an open
consistent
meeting.
with our existing regulations. And then anybody else will have the opportunity to respond to that, and we'll make a decision as to whether we need independent consultation.
Yeah, we'll pass along your suggestions, and including what about the 5 years out information.
Right.
And then I think it'll be incumbent upon them to, address those with you through the submission of an additional memo or through additional testimony at a future meeting. As Greg said, I think at some point you're going to need to talk about whether you want an independent engineer to dive into this on your behalf.
We're not there yet, though.
I don't think you are either. I think it might make sense to get through the bulk of the review, and then at potentially a quote unquote final meeting, have that conversation and maybe provide the applicant with the opportunity to ask for a continuance, or instruct them that there will be a continuance because you're going to bring an independent review online.
I mean, what you could do is for the June 5th meeting, try to get through the rest of the criteria, then have another deliberative session, not to decide specifically, how you're going to vote on it, but do you have enough information? And
Yeah.
what additional information do you want?
I think that's a good suggestion, and you may not need to do that in a closed deliberations, like tonight. This is on the
Open,
record.
yep.
You could have that conversation just after testimony, and people could listen.
Yep.
But they should know that they're going to need that 5-year study.
Yeah, we'll make.
And they should start working on that immediately.
We'll make them
And
aware.
I'm sure they left tonight knowing that.
One could actually expand that whole list. There's apparently a lot of different things that they could potentially add, but yeah.
And they need to show all the intersections. I mean, in previous traffic studies, they showed significantly more than that short little table. So, I mean, even if they're just tweaking the data from 2013 based on current traffic, they need to show all the intersections in one table. We should not have to be digging through, again, old data or whatever, because it's old data. It's not being presented at this meeting.
And as Alex said, we can't cherry pick.
And you cannot. It's their application. So
Right.
that's why I'm hesitant to say make the old data available to us, because I don't want it coloring or confusing any of the current information.
We'll keep them apprised of that. I will say that I think that this most recent memo was their attempt to say, this is what will change as a result of what has changed. Regarding Silver Street or other intersections, please refer to the 2013 study. Nothing has changed. But we'll forward that to them and see if they can summarize it in a more comprehensive single document. Yeah, for sure.
And I think I was quite, well, I will be clear with you, and we're on the record still, is with them, is that I felt that it was somewhat, it was adequate enough to say that the traffic volumes have not changed substantially. And so it's incumbent on the applicant to determine how much information they do send to us for consideration, clearly, and each of us are up to our own opinions of that. But I will send to Mitch, and I think I said it publicly today, is that the five-year post, so 2024 traffic volumes, and then there's significant differences in opinion in terms of some of the other components relative to trip generation, and then the way the signal design and phasing is at Commerce Street. And the fact is that the Commerce Street is a VTrans signal, and the southbound left-hand turn lane, to me, The other elements are of interest, but nothing is going to change. We're going to have congestion regardless. We're going to have a different level of congestion with this development, that's clear. But there they have the chance to create either an unsafe condition by not providing sufficient storage capacity for that one movement, and that's where they should focus their energy, and they should work to obtain consensus either from their opponents or from VTrans, who owns that traffic signal and that infrastructure. And then we need to protect ourselves, and I'm sensitive to the fact that we, if we are not able to be vague in terms of a monitoring study, I'm inclined to say, look, in the absence of a significant detailed traffic impact study that you say this is the distance, this is what we're confident on, then I'm in the opinion that the applicant bears the burden, and they would have to either provide an escrow or have other evidence that they have the mechanism in place to replace the culvert on 116, because the margin of error there, Dick, as you were saying, is not significant, 50 feet. So I think I've just said very clearly on the record what I think the applicant should be prepared to document.
And I'm assuming all that will be communicated well to the applicant.
We will. There may be a recommendation that they review this VCAM tape.
Yeah,
At
yeah,
least
still
this latter
on.
portion that they weren't
Still
present
on.
for. Okay.
Were we gonna talk about another advisory opinion or a determination of minor site plan?
We don't have a new one for you, no.
Oh, there was one that they approved and then they removed it, right? That's, you're talking about the ball for the
The
fields?
second one, yeah. So that was with, it was approved and withdrawn, okay, so
Yes.
it's not, okay. Why are we not considering it?
Because it's
The application was withdrawn.
was withdrawn.
Oh, okay. All right. Never mind.
So we do, for like Mechanicsville Road intersection with 116, I read that part of the Supreme Court decision, and we absolutely, the remedy has to be specifically called out. You can't just say, we'll study it and you're responsible for fixing it. You can't, so we have to decide what the remedy is, or
But
else
it's
there's not
our
going to be any
road.
remedy.
I mean, how do we don't get to make the decision whether it's a right in, right out, or whether there's a light, or whether that's VTrans's.
So I would not talk about this right now. Your attorney will advise you on that when you deliberate. That is an in-play issue with VTrans and the select board and.
Wise advice, Alex.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's true of the mitigation for increasing the stacking lane too.
I'll second Dennis's motion to adjourn.
Yep.
Thanks.
So Dennis and Mitch, I won't
Hardly
be
seems like
Detroit
enough
on June 5th.
time to get through here.